I think none of us really know the answer specifically as to when like is the right time to hang it up and when you feel okay with that. And as Berto mentioned, like I don't know, and maybe this was off camera, but the yeah most athletes, it's like usually they go out like usually they're kind of forced into retirement for some reason, or they're declining in their ability, and they kind of just realize it's time. But that being said, like with bodybuilding, I mean, you still see a lot of people up there who are probably not like they're the best versions of themselves at that point in time, which I think is amazing, but that are, probably past their prime bodybuilding years. And it's always interested me and kind of what that, fuel source is, like you said, Jeff. And I think for most of us, like the perspective of why we're competing, is it evolves over time. And, whether it be chasing a pro card or just, all of that's a byproduct essentially of just exhausting your own potential at any given point in time. But like after you've reached that peak, which you never know when you're at that, like what, if you have the desire to continue competing, then where is that desire coming from? And I think that's a hard question to answer. And I think a lot of it is, the camaraderie within the sport, I would imagine. I mean, you look at a guy like Marshall, and he's been competing. When did do you know when he started competing, either of you?
He had a stint before like 2012 when he came back.
Yeah, so he came.
And this was like a decade before.
Mm-hmm. And I've talked to Berto about this before, but I remember the first time I met him, I think the only time I've met him was at the 2012 Yorton Cup, and it was, in my opinion, like the most impressive physique up there. Just absolutely peeled, just presentation, everything was very polished, like he was a pro of pros. And I remember, I mean, he was 52 years old at that point. And that was probably like, now he's still kicking it, like he's still competing. And I think it would be interesting to hear like what his fuel is, at this point, because he probably is, past his prime as a natural bodybuilder. But I think he's certainly inspiring a lot of people along the way, and that could be his why. So I guess like as long as you have a why, wherever you're at in life, then that's really all you need. And if you don't, like there's like quitting lifting and quitting bodybuilding are two different things. I think most people listening to this podcast will probably be lifting for, the rest of their lives, or the majority, so, but competing's a different animal. There's time and a place for competing, and, you need to be not only motivated, but have that why that sustains you when motivation isn't there. And it's like I said, I don't have the answer as to when, people can, the definitive like flow chart of when to call it quits. But I think it's something I'm really excited to kind of go through in a way, that process. I know I'm not there yet. But there's a reason there's a lot of, masters competitors and bodybuilding and powerlifting that are still having the time of their lives doing it.
That why, Brian, it's like that's something that was frustrating me about a month ago. Like I think I was feeling like I needed to have a specific why. Because in the past, it's like, okay, I wanted to get a pro card. And I mean, that's a strong fuel source. I was super motivated. That's all I needed. It was like, okay, I'm going to win this show. And it was just go, go, go. And then in 2009, I was like, I just want to have fun this time around. It's all about fun. So it was like a strong why there. So it was always like this strong why, like every time I prepped, where this time I just didn't have like one strong why. And it was bugging me. Like I felt like I didn't have passion. And it was kind of demotivating me and getting me a little bit like depressed with competitive bodybuilding. Not depressed as a person, but just depressed as far as competitive bodybuilding. And I kind of realized after starting to ride my bike out along the levee, you know, basically out to the middle of nowhere, where I just sit there after I pedaled out there for about 10 or 15 minutes, and just in that peacefulness and that calm, I like started to gain a lot more clarity. I'm like, why do I have to have a strong why? Like, because I noticed like there's whys weekly, there's whys daily, and there's even whys within the day. Like I can use like just motive, like my son's watching me do something. It could be like me eating a meal, like, okay, I'm eating this certain foods and he's kind of seeing that. So it's like, okay, I'm basically modeling what I'm doing on a daily basis for him. Like that's a why. There are some days where I'm like, shit, Berto just crushed it at the last season, so I want to try to match that. Like I still have that competitive fire. And there's other days where it could be something completely different. And what I'm realizing is that I'm letting my mind drift to the future and to the past a lot. Because when you go through like, you know, 30 years of competition, that's basically where I'm at now. You do look at what you did in the past, and you do look at where that peak is, because you have more clarity where your peak is in hindsight. Like you guys kind of know more or less where your best years are from a competitor. You can say like Berto just had his best year, like because he's basically okay. You could compare it to 2017, and obviously he's improved his physique, he's improved placings, so everything's improved. So far that's his peak. That for me, like it's pretty set that 2014 was probably my best ever season. So it's hard for me to like realize like I'm trying to compare myself now to 2014 all the time and trying to beat that. But the thing is I was 43 years of age and now I'm 52. So to
Today,
think like
by the way, it's your birthday.
Today. Yeah.
Birthday.
Thank you. So it's just very hard kind of like trying to live up to that standard the older you get. So that's where I was struggling with. I was just constantly looking at the past, trying to compare myself to that. Like we tell our athletes all the time, don't compare yourself to others on Instagram. Well, in my case, like don't compare yourself to yourself, Jeff. Just you got to stay in the present. And even in the future, I'm like, okay, you know, how am I going to look when I get on stage as a 52-year-old? You know, am I going to be like competitive? Am I going to look the part still? So I've had to really just kind of center myself and keep myself in the moment within the process and go, okay, like my bike ride, I'm enjoying this. Cold air is hitting my face, quads are burning. I'm feeling present with that. I'm enjoying that. Even with my training, same thing, just stay present. Every meal I'm having, stay present. And it's kind of relieved a lot of the pressures and the insecurities and the anxieties that go with that. And I'm kind of just slowly but surely accepting that whatever I bring now, it's going to be the best version of myself now. And I have to be okay with that. It's learning to be okay with that. And I think as long as I'm doing like getting up in the morning and I'm still doing it, that must mean there's a little bit of joy there left. So I think for me, I kind of thinking like, okay, the day that I know I probably don't want to do this anymore, like I'm just done, like that's when I'll be done. Because there's other things I've done in my life where it's like, I just don't want to do this no more. So that's kind of like what my last month has looked like on this side of it.
Yeah, that what you mentioned, you know, the staying present. I guess that's I think a skill we hone over time throughout life, and addresses kind of the question I have always kind of thought about. You know, as simple as it sounds, is it's like if you stay just in the moment and you focus on, you know, if like you said, we're not comparing. We encourage athletes not to compare themselves to other athletes on Instagram. And so why would it be any different for ourselves? And I think that's an excellent point. And, you know, I always tell my athletes, it's like the placings will take care of themselves if we just exhaust your potential right now. Like that's all we can do. Like, let's not focus on the placings. Let's focus on showing up as best as we can. And so I think that, I mean, you're right. Like the same thing applies as we age. Our expectations have to shift, and like that's the reality. Like we're aging, and so just optimizing within whatever landscape of life you're in, I think is like that's an exciting journey in and of itself.
I think this podcast was like meant for you, Jeff, because you're the closest one out of the three of us to like seeing what's on the other side of that mountain. Like Brian and I, like like whenever you're going up like a mountain on a hike or something, it's like you're like, oh, okay, we're almost at the top, and then you're not there, and then before you know it, you're there. That like you have to, it's over, and you have to descend downwards. You've kind of you started your descent in a way, or at least you're at peace with the possibility of that. And I think Brian and I can, like all athletes, fantasize about how we're going to handle that, but it's different to actually like be there, and you have no choice. It's like when you quit bodybuilding, like in your, was it like 20s, the early 30s, that's different, because that was more of a mood thing. Whereas like now it's not a mood thing. It's more of like, hey, you have less years in the sport left than, what you've trekked so far. And that's why it came to me like when I was on that plane, because I'm like, man, like all these little things are awesome. Like it's exciting to hop on a plane, to, go across the country, to, like all the people you run into, just getting a taste for like this promoter's shows. You've heard about the show, you've never done it. Like all that stuff is so exciting, and it's like, damn, yeah, at some point you ain't gonna be doing this forever. And yeah, part of what also makes it, at least for me, alluring is the fact that hey, there's a possibility that I can do well. And that's been a newer thing for me. Whereas I think, just 5-10 years ago, I was more of a, blue collar bodybuilder. It's like, I'm gonna go up there and I'm gonna do okay. And now I have like different expectations. So it's like, I'm up here, like my trajectory is like, okay, it's not going as fast, but I'm like, okay, so when do we come back down? And you don't know. And that is a little frightening. And again, I'm like we discussed this off air. It's like, okay, so when that time comes, it's like, what are you going to do? Right now I have lofty goals. I want to, keeping in mind that I think every sport has found ways to have athletes like last longer, right? Like if you go back to the 80s, like, NBA, NFL, like, like you say, oh, you're approaching 30. It's like, we might have to trade this guy soon here. Well, he's still worth a little something. And, now guys are in their early 30s and just as athletic as they were like coming into the league. And the same thing with like natural bodybuilding. I think it was always kind of there. It's just, I think we compared ourselves too much to the other sports. So I think there'll be a lot more Marshall Johnsons like in the next few decades. I think Marshall was proof of that. And I Dave Riggs, Marshall Johnson, guys like that, like to me, they serve as inspirations because no one gave them the example. They just legit were like, yeah, and it probably, the perspective was probably very similar to the one you have right now, Jeff, where it's just like, I'm just going to take care of business on a daily basis the way I usually do. And that amounts to something. So, yeah, I guess I want to be a pioneer in that sense. I'll try to be, and that's if my interests are still there, because that's another possibility. It's like, what you value in life changes so much. Yeah, so who knows? Like maybe I might have the capabilities when I'm in my 50s to give it another decade, but I just might not be interested in that anymore. And I think that would be the closest thing to a soft landing for like an athlete, to like actually like leave under your own power, and there's athletes in certain sports that have done that. you know, that just like left at the peak of their careers. And with them, like, this is the part that troubles me with that perspective. It's like, okay, what if I decide, you know what, like, forget this bodybuilding thing. I'm just going to live a generally healthy life, lift, go on runs, whatever, do an Ironman, do a marathon, you know, just have these athletic rendezvous, right? It's like, I wonder, like, do they ever stop and think? Like, does Barry Sanders ever think, like, could I have had like one more 2,000-yard season had I, like, you know? So there's that part too that's troubling. It's like, okay, is that going to keep me up at night? Like, could I have, you know, what could have been?
That's part of my why now. Like, I don't want to have no regret. Like, I don't want to just say, you know what, I'm not really feeling this as much as I used to. Let me just stop. Because next year, middle of next year, I don't want to go, oh man, shit. What if I was up on a WNBF Worlds? You know, I might have regrets. So I just want to like make sure, go through one more season, and then just make sure, like, at the end, okay, you know, I did it. And I understand too, like, the why can change. Like, my why I can actually learn what my why is or was after the fact. Like 6 months after the season's over, I'm sure I'll have even more clarity on maybe why I actually went through that process again. But yeah, regret is definitely part of the why. Because I don't want to have regrets at the end, like, oh, I should have done that.